Hi everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, which is the next in our series on the Levelling Up agenda. Today we'll be focusing on local partnerships. My name is John Gray and I'm Vice President for UK Operations at MZ Burning Glass, and excited to be joined by a great panel of experts today who's going to give us some really useful insight on the world of levelling up. So, as always, before we get into the main session, just to tell you a little bit about MZ Burning Glass, for those of you who may be new to us. Firstly, you see there on screen our vision to be the global authority on the labour market, leading the transition to a future of work based on skills and capabilities. And as we've seen in the last webinar series, in the last few webinars, and we'll see today, skills is really at the heart of that matter. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about skills as today progresses. So levelling up as a quick reminder, some of you will be well immersed in this by now, others maybe not as much so. So a quick reminder on what we're talking about. So levelling up, the white paper was published in February and is built around 12 key policy missions to be achieved by 2030, and they encompass everything from boosting productivity, spreading opportunities, to restoring local pride and local leadership, and so on. And remember, it's about growth everywhere, not just levelling up. So it's about levelling up, the lower areas, but also keeping on improving other areas across the country as well. And as we'll see, as we've talked about many times before, and we'll see today, data has a critical role within this. And I'm sure we'll talk about data on the session today. So before we get into the main agenda and the main discussion for today, as I said, around local partnerships, I just wanted to flag a piece of research that we're just about to start at MZ Burning Glass, a data-driven approach to levelling up local economies. This is going to be in two parts. The first is going to be localised reports for local authorities. Hopefully around summertime, we'll be launching these. So this is going to look at things like jobs and employer demand, industrial and skills complexity, and those will be available at a regional level. We've then got a big UK-wide major report that will have lots of more detailed information in there. So UK-wide analysis, looking at different analysis at industry level and skills level. So skills, looking at things like the disparity between current skills and those needed to improve the economy. So really excited to be telling people about that today. We are looking for partners to be involved with that, support us with that. There will be a financial contribution to that, but if you do want to be involved with that kind of cutting edge research work, then please let me know afterwards, and I can tell you a little bit more about that. So getting into the main topic for today, again, exploring levelling up, this time thinking about the world of partnerships. And as we know, key to this agenda, as often when we're doing this work across different regions and different stakeholders within different regions, partnerships is critical. And we often see data as that common language which can be used between those different partnerships, between the stakeholders in those relationships. And I'm really pleased today that we've got an expert panel who are going to be sharing that insight with us around that topic. So looking at this from a range of stakeholder perspectives. So in terms of our agenda, we're going to, first of all, in a few moments' time, hand off to Eleanor McGreeny, who's our head of global research at MZ Burning Glass. Eleanor's going to kick off giving us some insights on Devon and Worcestershire, which are the two kind of main features today in terms of regions, and that's based on other members of our expert panel. So we'll go over to Eleanor first shortly. Then we're going to bring in our expert panel and various conversations we're going to get going this afternoon. First from MZ Burning Glass, and will be very familiar to viewers. We have Ben Owen, Director of Further Education, and Will Cookson, the Director of Communities and Government. And then we're joined by two special guests today, Claire Heywood, Deputy Principal of Heart of Worcestershire College, and Phill Adams, who is Programme Director for Devon, Plymouth and Torbay County Deal. And as I said, we're gonna have I think a really good discussion today and get some insight from different perspectives of partnerships in different regions. And then at the end, I'll pull things together and tell you a little bit more about some upcoming things in the world of Emsey Burning Glass, including one exciting announcement today. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Eleanor, and Eleanor's going to take us through some data. So hi, Eleanor.
Thanks, John, and hi everyone. As John mentioned, what I'm going to do now is use a couple of slides to set the scene in terms of data, in terms of the skills challenge that different places might face, using the two areas of our two guest speakers as example to illustrate some points. Can you go back? Yeah, thanks, John. So firstly, I want to look at employers' demand for skills in different places. And I've done these two bar charts using our job postings data and using our open skills taxonomy, which allows us to categorize skills that are present in job ads by broad categories, and in particular 32 categories that you can see here on the slides. What you can see on the left-hand side, on the blue charts, you can see skills demands in Devon, Plymouth and Torbay for the past year. So this shows which are the skills that are that more frequently come up in the job postings in this area in the past year. Whereas on the right-hand side in orange, we have the same picture, but for Worcestershire. And as you can see, there are some similarities between the two, but also some differences. So physical and inherent abilities and business-related skills come up at the top for both areas as some of the skills that are most in demand in job postings in these two areas. But there are also some differences. The first one that I wanted to pick out is in information technology. This is actually a tiny difference. It's just information technology is the third most in-demand skill in Worcestershire, but the fourth in the area around Devon, Plymouth and Torbay. But when it comes to actually the frequency with which these skills appears in the job postings, they're actually quite similar between the two, 21% of the time in Worcestershire, 22% in Devon, Plymouth and Torbay. But some other differences are bigger. If we take transportation, supply chain and logistic related skills, or manufacturing and production skills, what we can see is that both of these categories play a much more prominent role in job postings in Worcestershire than they do in Devon and Plymouth and Torbay. And it's not just that they are above in the ranking, but the frequency with which they appear in the job postings is much higher. So, for example, on manufacturing, it's 12% of job posting mention manufacturing related skills in Worcestershire against only 6% in the area around Devon. And this very much shows us, first, that there are quite local challenges when it comes to skills demand, and that these challenges are very different from one place to another. And this is kind of reflected of the industrial composition of different places. But as you can see in the next slide, what I've done was to concentrate on information technology and look at the other skills that are associated with job postings that mention IT skills. And what you can see is that even within a specific subcategories of job postings, in this case, the ones that are related to IT in one way or another, there are some commonalities between the two areas, but there are also some differences. So we can see that communication, initiative and leaderships are skills that are associated with IT in the two areas, and they're quite important for both areas. But there are also some differences. For example, business strategy or, for example, business management play different roles in the two areas. And so do other skills like problem solving. And this helps us understand that even within a specific subgroup of occupation of job postings, the type of skills that are required by employers in an area vary quite a lot. And again, highlights how local these challenges are and how it really is important to understand the data and understand the local economy in order to understand and address the skill challenge. Which then brings me to my next and last slide, which instead looks at the other side of the coin, looks at education provision in different places, particularly focusing here on FE and apprenticeships. And what I've done is I've plotted the achievements in 2021 for both FE and apprenticeships related to IT in the two areas. And there are two things to see here. Again, some commonalities to begin with. We can see the level 3 ITC practitioners is one of the most popular type of achievements related to IT in both areas. But there are also some differences. First, if you look at Worcestershire, for example, even within this ITC practitioners level 3, we see that the makeup is slightly different from the makeup in Devon. There are slightly more apprenticeships and less FE achievements than in the other area. And then the other thing to notice is that in the area around Devon, we also see quite a lot of level 2 achievements and more level 6 achievements than we see in Worcestershire, again showing how there are differences between the two areas. Now, the thing is, and that's the topic for the discussion, broadening with our guest speaker, the important thing here is that the differences that we see in skills supply between different places and between skills demand in the different places need to be reflective of the local areas and the local needs. And that's why we need very much employers and education providers to talk and work together on addressing skills challenges at the local level. So that's it for me, and handing over back to John.
Thank you very much for that, Ellen. It's really, really interesting. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen now. We will be sharing the slides afterwards, but it's really useful to see that data and just kind of set the context for what's going on today, and you know, be able to visualize some of that data in a different way as well. Is particularly useful. So what we're going to do now is bring in Ben and Claire into the conversation. So both from the world of further education, and Ben and Claire are just going to kick off with a bit of a conversation about what's happening from a levelling up perspective in further education, and then we'll come back and bring in some other guests. So over to Ben.
Thanks ever so much, John, and afternoon, everyone. Good to see everyone on the webinar as well. I think when we talk about levelling up, I think levelling up is very much the ambition of where people want FE and skills and curriculum to be. I think the mechanism to do that was the FE White Paper, Skills for Jobs Act, as we've seen go through Parliament recently. And I think one of the interesting things with Elena's slides is very much, if I put my cap back on of my time in FE, the conversations that we had around planning and making sure that obviously the curriculum offer, the mix between apprenticeships and classroom based, was right and met the local demand, and obviously the employers had that voice. And I know, as I bring Claire into this conversation, I know that's something that's really close to Heart of Worcestershire College, particularly around the leadership role I think you guys have around blended learning nationally as well. So do you want to talk about the college's approach to levelling up? I know we've had quite a few policy pieces come at us, haven't we, Claire, in the last sort of 12 or 18 months, but what is the college's approach to levelling up and the whole sort of collaboration piece around that?
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and afternoon, everybody. I think to start off, I'd say that you know, we haven't been sat waiting to be told to start collaborating. I think, as you mentioned, we lead the Blended Learning Consortium, and that's got over 150 colleges across the UK that we already collaborate with and have done for quite some time, because, you know, it's a sort of a combined way to put resource out there that makes it a bit cheaper for everybody. So it's in our DNA, if you like, to try and do that kind of work. And I think no college in the land has sort of sat as an island. I think we all look to collaborate wherever we can, and I don't think it's, you know, we've been waiting for the starting gun to do this stuff. So I think that's important to say, really. I think we all collaborate well with our local authorities, our local district and city councils to support the community agenda, and obviously with government in terms of national policy on that front, and increasingly over the last several years, obviously employers with the apprenticeship levy and the changes that have gone on there, really. So in terms of how we're approaching that, it's kind of business as usual, but on speed, I guess, because we are dealing with a plethora of policy initiatives and funding initiatives to come with that, with different grants and pots, and it's really trying to align all of those to make sure that we're meeting the needs of employers, of local councils, statutory bodies, agencies, and first and foremost, the learners and residents who are not yet learners, to make sure that we somehow in the mix balance all that, to address that levelling up need, and it's using the data for us to identify what those gaps are, and being self-critical of, for example, any money that we do in any delivery of funding we have in the community, are we hitting the right spots with that? Is it time for us to recalibrate that? And because the other thing to say is, obviously, with the situation we're in as a country at the moment, disadvantage is moving and it's changing, and it's not what it was, and those who were already disadvantaged are becoming more so, and there are more people likely to fall into those categories. So it's about being agile, but building on the collaboration, I think, that we've already been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think looking back at the policy space, we've kind of been leading to this place for a while. Like I said, there's been IoTs, good collaboration between FE, HE, and local authority as well. And it's good to hear, particularly that piece that I think we're seeing a lot more around. Yes, the desire is around higher technical skills, out of the skills for jobs paper, and as it is the Act now. But actually, I think like John mentioned at the start, it's around making sure that we level up every aspect of society. And I definitely think that's where FE's roots are, if you like, around that sort of anchor institution within each community, isn't it? Around making sure that the offer is fit for purpose for a plethora of clientele, really. In terms of obviously the things that are coming out of the paper, you've alluded already to the link to devolution and the sort of the push around sort of localized funding. What do you think are the main opportunities for FE in general, for you as a college, and where do you think some of the challenges are when we kind of pull into that sort of border piece around funding? Where do you think some of the opportunities and challenges will be moving forward?
I mean, I think the opportunities, which we're starting to really see, I think now it offers, and it is about using the data more wisely. I think we have a lot of data in FE and in local authorities, and we perhaps aren't as smart with it as we could be. And I think for us, certainly, it's about sort of tuning into that in a better way and looking at what that data is telling us, to make sure we're aligning what we have got in terms of funding and with those opportunities that are coming along with different pots like Multiply, shared prosperity funds, strategic development funds, etc., to make sure that's being aligned in the best way possible to level up, I guess, to make sure that people who need those opportunities are getting access to them. But at the same time, as you say, Ben, it isn't always a straight line. We've got the free courses for jobs available to us, and we're really pushing on that. But adult learners have had many years of being told by us, well, you can learn with us, but you have to take out a loan. And now we're saying to them, do you want to come and do some learning with us? And it's quite hard to market that and to get that message out there, particularly at a time where people are, potentially under different kinds of stresses and strains, with the cost of living and those pressures going on there. So it's kind of managing that challenge really. But I think the opportunity with that for us has come from a slightly more empowered position of using that data with conversations with employers. And I think the earlier part of the presentation touched on this around the skills really, and what the vacancies are telling us in terms of this. It's not so much jobs, it's the skills behind those jobs. And I think both an opportunity and a challenge for colleges and awarding bodies and funding agencies is around how do you make that fit what is needed. So at the moment we've got a qualification funded provision in the adult skills sector, and it is what it is. Then there's only so far you can break that down. But actually, if there are certain skills within that are needed that sit across several existing qualifications, how do you extract that into something different? And I think that's quite interesting. It's a really creative opportunity. So if I take myself for an example, I work in FE, I'm an FE manager, but I have to do HR, I have to do accounting, I have to do some legal stuff, but I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a HR expert, but actually I need a bit of all of that. Now if you apply that across many jobs, actually what I don't need is a full fat AAT, I don't need a CIPD qual, and I don't need a law degree, but I need a bit of everything. So in the qualifications framework we've got now, there isn't really a lot of room to move on that. And I think therefore there's an opportunity for us all to really look at that and challenge that back and be talking to awarding bodies and the employers. And that's where I think this is a chance to really empower that conversation, to say, well, this is what we're seeing as the need, how can we deliver that as the middlemen, I guess, middle women and men.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things, speaking to our clients up and down really the country and across all the home nations, I think the one sort of data set when we look at the skills data like Elena presented, the one sort of data set that gets people talking and employers particularly excited is the common skills data, because I think that's the bit where like you say, it's not necessarily the full fat version of a qualification. It's right, you know, you've got a set of skills. If you've had a job for a period of time, you're going to need some short, sharp provision. And I think that for me is a challenge, but a really big opportunity around how we change funding. And particularly, like I said, when you look at those softer common skills pieces, particularly around leveling people up from maybe long-term unemployment or level 1 type provision to level 2 type provision, it is not necessarily always a full qualification. It's perhaps a combination of skills-based qualifications, and that certainly resonates up and down the country in conversations we're having with providers as well. And I think my final question for you, and I think you've already kind of touched upon this, and the sector has been doing it for a long time, but with this particular lens, you know, how are you seeing the college continuing to collaborate more deeper with particular stakeholders? I think the policy space is definitely one around collaboration between HE and FE. We're kind of seeing that in different areas. Can you talk us through some of the work that you're doing currently around collaboration?
Yeah, of course. So, you know, as you've mentioned, HE, and you know, we're having conversations with them, and part of the SDF bids that we're going through the process of now is how do you look at and explore that credit-based modularization, which is a challenge for the universities, because you know we're kind of used to having to sort of jump around and sort of you know, sing from different hymn sheets, but it's difficult because you're kind of asking them to rethink what they do. You know, is a very much a full fat kind of degree option, but you know, the world is changing, and you know, it's got to be tackled. And I think there's a really interesting piece of work there that can benefit everybody, in particular students, around that HE piece, where again, you may not need the sort of full fat version, but actually you may pick off modules or units that get you to where you need to go in the interim, you know, for a job change. So for example, if you're in midwifery, you might be in the existing workforce. There may be something there that you need as a bolt-on in terms of where that industry is going in the future. I don't know why I picked that example. I know nothing about it, but you know, it's about adding to existing workforce as well as bringing in new people. And I think our main piece of collaboration around sort of local authorities that you mentioned there, Ben, is very much that inclusion piece. I'm very passionate about. You know, it's all very well having, you know, level 3 courses for people with jobs, but people don't magically become level 3 overnight if they've been unemployed for a long time or they've had health issues for a long time. And I'm not advocating here for, you know, reams of employability programs, because I know they've had a sort of death now sounded, but it is around those skills that people need, and people do need confidence skills and communication skills and resilience, etc. And actually, if you look at the top skills that employers are looking for, those soft skills, so-called soft skills, often come out top above the vocational skills that are being asked for by employers. Talking to a manager of a recruitment agency, an owner of a recruitment agency on Thursday last week, and he was very much talking about this, saying, look, you know, these companies, they will give the skills training that those employees need, but what they need is the resilience and the reliability and the communication skills. That's what we need people to have. And I think it's about making sure that nobody gets left behind in this rush, really. And also, a colleague of mine always talks about hiding the wiring, which is a nice phrase, really, because I think our job is to try and do all that in this time of multiple policies, multiple routes to learning, and different ways to kind of jump on board or progress if you're already on board, and sort of convince people that their time investment is worth it, because for the longer term impact for them and local employers, you know, there's going to be a payoff for them. So I think, I'm not sure if I've answered your question, Ben, but I think the collaboration piece is, you know, we're having those conversations 360 at the moment with the universities, with employers, with other colleges, I would say, and also then obviously local and district councils around what their priorities are, which within Worcestershire, we're not unitary authority, so they are all slightly different, and they all have different priorities. So it's tuning into that, and we sit across the county, or most of it, so it's tuning into that and working with our college partners as well to make sure we're not duplicating.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, I think you answered it really well. In terms of collaboration, I think you really discussed what was the heart of this, and I think one of the challenges, and you hit upon this around particularly soft skills and those sort of common skills is really a challenge for the current Y12 cohort. Next year's Y12 cohort, they're very far behind their peers, and this potentially, we talk about levelling up and not stealing John's sort of thunder later on around when we talk about where we're going to be in 2030, but I know that you in particular, the college, is a really big voice around that collaboration with funding bodies, DFE, around the need to look at that as catch-up funding, because 40 hours is going to be really challenging to get someone in Y12 that's had a really challenging learning experience during COVID to get them back where they need to be, because that, the blink of an eye, those young people will become adults, and then that becomes a problem around sort of getting people into sustained work. So I think you've answered that fantastically, and thanks ever so much for your questions, and really appreciate it, Claire. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Claire. It's really interesting to get that perspective from the FE sector. And I think a few themes certainly I've just started to write down already, which I think will crop up time and time again, about the funding of provision and how that fits in with levelling up, about common skills, about technical skills, and something I was talking to a client about recently: when does a common skill become a technical skill? Because it's as Claire said, you're involved in some of those things like finance and HR and other things that are probably a more in-depth level than a basic common skill. So there's some really interesting stuff there. So we're going to bring in now Will and Phill into the conversation, just to similar type of conversation, this time focused a bit more on the world of economic development, and then we'll pull things back together. Just to say as well, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the question section on the control panel. What we'll try to do then is bring those questions out in the more general discussion that's coming up next. So if you can do that over the next few minutes, that would be great. But over to Will.
Thanks, John. It's great to be having this discussion. It's now, I think, the leading policy driver with our customers in local government in quite a crowded space. Obviously, levelling up isn't anything, well, it is new in terms of where it's got to, but this was around and been talked about pre-pandemic. It just got slightly derailed by the pandemic. I'm really pleased to have Phill with us today. As John said at the start, Phil's the Programme Director for Devon, Plymouth and Torbay Devolution Deal, long-standing MZ Burning Glass customer. He has been referred to by one of his colleagues, and I'll spare his blushes, as Mr. Devolution. So I'm really excited to hear what he has to share with us. And I thought a good place to start would be, Phill, if you can just tell us a bit about the strategy being taken in Devon in regards or in response to the proposed county deal, because I know you're some way through the development of that, but it'd be really good to share that and what you've learned along the way, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Will. And yeah, Mr. Devolution might be pushing it a little bit, but I'll certainly give it a go. I mean, yeah, we're in an interesting place. I think the thing that's probably worth saying is that we and Claire touched on it. We're not starting from a zero base. This is something that we've been building towards for a number of years. I mean, in some ways, our collective working journey started probably 2010 when the LEP was set up, when we started to create some of this infrastructure. And we've been working around the skills gaps, the productivity gap, our sort of economic strategy with our FE colleagues, with our HE colleagues for a long period of time. I come from a slightly strange background in that I was previously the LEP's lead on skills and also the lead on the local skills advisory panel. So, you know, we've brought a lot of that learning and a lot of the learning that MZ has provided us with actually through its data sources into what we're doing on devolution. I mean, just in terms of where we are, early days, I think it's fair to say. I think it's fair to say that mayoral areas are moving slightly faster because they take longer. But as a level 2 area in the white paper, we've come together as a partnership of authorities, of education, of higher learning, innovation and business. And we're starting to put together the evidence base. We're starting to look at what we need. And I think that what we need is the critical bit in our devolution journey. Every CA area has had its part of theirs, but what we're starting to do is map out those areas which we think are important. You know, Claire touched on deprivation, touched on that levelling up, touched on the living sort of wage and some of the things that we've started to look around. I think what we're able to do and what we're doing through our devolution journey is, right, where are the interventions that will make the most difference for our communities as opposed to that national policy? How do we shift some of those powers that they're looking to give us control over? Things like AEB, things like some of the housing policy, things like transport policy. Where could we make the most difference on those micro areas, on those town level areas, on some of the granular data that EMSI's provided us with around the business community, and really start to get more bang for our buck in terms of where we go next? I mean, critical things that we're seeing on the ground, we all know there's a huge amount of fragmentation in terms of the way that some of the government policies work together. So the first mission for us is, how do we arrest that? How do we start to bring this together better? How do we learn the lessons from Manchester, from Birmingham, from some of the positives that have come out of devolution elsewhere? I think in terms of levelling up more widely, how do we start to align some of those funds, whether it's LUF, whether it's SPF, whether it's other things coming forward, and make sure that they're starting to tick the boxes in terms of our levelling up journey? You know, where are those hardest hit communities? How do we close the gap in rural, in urban deprivation, in coastal? So that's kind of where we are, and data's underpinning that, collaboration's underpinning that. It's a journey we're all on. I mean, we don't feel that we're starting a revolution through this. We're feeling that this is an evolution of where we wanted to go, and it's about that levelling up next step from that longer term journey we've been on around productivity, inclusion and sort of economic fairness. So that's kind of where we are, I think, at the minute.
That's great to hear, Phil. It sounds like you are making some great progress there. And I think that point at the start is levelling up is the frame and the focus, but that work had already started way back and continues to evolve. It's really interesting. I also just wanted to ask, or just get you to elaborate really, in terms of local stakeholders, and you alluded to some of this, who's in the mix and how are you bringing them together? What do you have, particular forums or particular mechanisms to get people to acknowledgement of collaboration?
So we have, I mean, we've set up, just in terms of the nuts and bolts of how we're operating, 16 groups: housing, skills, economic development, transport. We're looking at those cross-cutting elements, so things like social inclusion, things like skills, things like productivity. What we're doing is that we've got the universities, we've got the LEP, we've got some of the housing associations, we've got some of those wider socioeconomic partners around the table, we've got health, looking at what are the key drivers of those individual subtopics. So if we take skills, for example, looking at what the barriers to learning are, whether they are all to do with provision, whether they are to do with business demand, whether they are to do with supply, whether they're to do with transport actually on our side, getting people to and from learning opportunities, or whether there's opportunities there about remote learning and other provision. We've got those kind of sub-theme groups that then are feeding into our wider strategy. And the piece of work that we're going through at the moment, this is why I say it's early days, is we're plotting our asks against those needs. We're plotting our design against the sort of the gaps that we're finding through the data. You know, we're looking at things like, we know that the Torridge coastal area, for example, in Devon, has got significant differences to Exeter in terms of learning, in terms of wage levels, in terms of productivity. We look at the micro data on the sectors, we look at the innovation rates, we're starting to plot our asks around, we need X for Y. And that's being done through collaborative partnerships, it's being done through co-design. So the first thing they made us do, and it's the same for all 9 Devo areas that are going through it at the moment, was we went through a process where we had to design our asks, blank sheet of paper, what do you want? And we all put that forward, and then typically government came back and said, right, you can have what's in the menu plus a few bits. So we're used to that, but we've designed that in collaboration with about 100, 150 partners. And it's this process of going through and evidencing why we think it's the case, why we need it, and how we make that case to Treasury, amongst other people, about why the funding should be devolved. It's interesting times, yeah.
No, it sounds, I think we're going to need a follow-up, Phil, to see where we get at a later stage. One more question from me, and you'd be surprised if I didn't have a data type question, but I'm really interested to get your thoughts on the metrics that you see as being important, bearing everything in mind that you've shared already, and that local factor in particular. in terms of measuring the impact of levelling up? Where do you think that's going?
Yeah, and it's interesting. So Elena, some of the data that we've just looked at is very similar to where we're getting to. So we've all seen the 12 missions, we've all seen the broad metrics which are starting to come forward. I mean, I think about around some of the data, there is there's a puritanical piece to it, which will be around level 2, level 3 achievement rates and the traditional. But I think that soft skills data, I think that business specific data, I think that qualitative and quantitative piece at the micro level is starting to be part of it as well. Certainly what we're feeding back is that business intelligence piece. What does the business community need? How does it fit with the current offer? How does it fit in terms of supply, in terms of human beings in the labour market, in terms of environmental factors, and starting to pull that. And if you look at the data that EMSI and Burning Glass have been providing us with, vacancy data, soft skills data, hard skills data, some of the macroeconomic data, some of the demographic data, that all feeds into that metric table around the 12 missions. And we've got direct line of sight, certainly on 3 or 4 of those, where we're saying, right, wage data at the micro level, we need that. Have we got it? Yes, we've got the maximised. Have we got the supply and demand data? What are we looking at in terms of that skills provision? What is FE? Where are they in terms of that delivery? We're using the tools that we've currently got to match against those 12 indicators. Now, government's doing a bit of work. We know they are around trying to get those finalised, and there'll be other stuff that comes forward. I'm not sure whether we're meant to have said that or not, but they will. We all suspect it. We're working through though. But I mean, for us, skills data, GVA data, wage data, demographic data, micro level qualitative business data, vacancy data, that's where the real metrics are at the moment. And that's what we're looking at day to day in terms of mapping our interventions. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks for that, guys. So yeah, again, really fascinating take from Phil's world, and interesting to see some kind of overlap in there as well with FE. And having worked in FE and with local LEPs and other organisations for a long time, collaboration has been ongoing. It's always been there. This just gives it a new frame. So a couple of questions. I'm going to put a couple of questions now into the panel, and we've had a question come through from one of our viewers today as well. And if anybody else has got any questions, please do ask them. Just conscious of time, so I'm just going to kind of point these questions directly at panel members rather than a bit more of an open discussion, just to keep things moving along. So first, if just one for Claire, if that's okay. I'm interested in, we talk a lot about partnerships and collaboration and working with different stakeholders. What main challenges tend to come across when working with stakeholders in these kind of...
The challenges that we come across? I think, yeah, I mean, I think that the first and most obvious one, I'm obviously talking from an FE perspective, but I think I represent views of other people too, is, we're turning off the competition tap, aren't we? And we're turning on the collaboration one. Now, the reality is there's been collaboration going on behind the scenes for quite some time. So I don't think that's a major blocker, but it is a mind shift, because the realities are, there are challenges with funding. And that leads you to then say, well, actually, how do you increase your funding pot? Well, you attract more learners, and you find you rubbing up against other people. So, it's a reality that with a system you have to work within. And I think it's about that systems leadership as well, because you then start to look at schools, sixth forms, A levels, and those routes. So where does all of that sit? And I think the biggest challenge, really, sort of across all of that, still comes down to two things. The workforce needs a workforce. The businesses need a workforce that either comes from the existing workforce being upskilled, or it comes from young people entering the workforce. So the two big challenges for me are that careers guidance is still too passive, and that the workforce planning is not good enough. And I think we can spend ages talking about productivity challenges within the country. I'm not an economist, but I've read around it, and I think those are two big issues. And unless we tackle those, we could still keep having these conversations about why the local college isn't delivering what we need them to deliver. But actually, it's more nuanced than that. Actually, it's not that we're not, but you need to know what it is you need delivering. And so I think those two quite big challenges that we all have to kind of collaborate on to fix. Otherwise, where do these people come from? they're not going to magically float in the door.
Yeah, I completely agree, Claire. I think you answered it really well there. And yeah, that could be another webinar discussion in its own right in talking about some of those challenges. So, Phill, question for you, probably a little bit unfair, but Ben alluded to this kind of 2030 earlier on, and you know, all the levelling up aims are kind of set there to 2030. It seems a long way away, but we know it'll be there in the blink of an eye. So what I'm interested in really is what you think, what you hope to achieve, and what you think can be achieved in that time frame. It sounds such a long time, but it's not actually that long in terms of the pace of change.
No, I mean, it's not. I mean, ideally, what would we like to achieve? We'd like to be the international economy of choice. You'd like all of those taglines that we get. What do I actually think we'll achieve? 2030, I think what we're looking to achieve is to get to a point where we've got a devolved suite of powers locally around some of those core levers. I think around poverty, around skills, and around local intervention, certainly on the business support side and some of the innovation side, that we have a menu where we can start to make a bit of a difference in trajectory. Looking at where we've been and looking at where the Heart of the Southwest and the Devon, Plymouth and Torbay area is, you know, we know that there are areas that lag behind the national average. We lag Cornwall. If you actually look at the micro data in quite a few of our areas, we lag all over the country. I think what we're hoping for by 2030 is being in a position where we're moving them 1 or 2% in the right direction. That trajectory change has started. We've got places where people feel proud of where they live, and you start to see some of that investment sweep through. But for those of us who've been around economic development for years and have worked around the skills piece, you know, it's not a 1 or 2 year change, it's a 25-year cycle. And if you look at those places that have been more successful and changed their trajectory, it takes successive waves of investment and change in policy to do it. We're realistic about that. I think the thing for us is that we've tried the other route. We've tried national interventions and that competitive approach. It didn't work for us. We never make that big step forward. So now we're trying something different, which is locally directed activity, local control, and seeing whether we can do a better job. And time will tell. But I think for every devolution area, that 10 to 25 year journey, looking at the Manchesters of this world, looking at those places that have really started to make those changes, looking at Newcastle back in the early noughties where it made that change. That's the journey we want to be on. We will see how fast we can get there.
Yeah, again, really, a great answer. It's easy to kind of get carried away into it and think there's going to be kind of quick change, but these things are, as Duncan often says, are quite glacial in terms of how we can track that progress. So, thank you for that one, Phill. A question that's come in from one of our viewers, and it's kind of directed at Phill, so I'll just push this one in there as well. Does Phill have any insight into how LSIPs will work with SAPs as at a LEP MCA level?
I have a little bit, so I can give you a little bit of a steer. So, I mean, obviously, dependent on your level of devolution and dependent on where you are in that journey, SAPs will slowly transition across into the new LSIP environment. Now, there's a bit of timing change there because in some areas SAPs will go quicker than others. I think the idea is that the LSIPs over time will become the strategic body and the SAP will become less and less important. Whether they'll disappear will depend on what happens with your LEP, and obviously that's going to be different in different areas. I mean, the way that DFE have described it to me, and I know they've described it to other colleagues who'll be on the call and around the room, is that different places will have different alternative solutions and there'll be different geographies for the next 3 or 4 years. We as a sector are going to have to get used to that. And that's something that's a little bit uncomfortable, but that seems to be where we're going with some of the policy approach, at least in the interim. The skills white paper and the levelling up white paper, there is a bit of a conflict there, but it's actually a conflict, hopefully, that we as local partners can manage. We're used to it, that differential geography. I mean, within Devon, we're pretty clear that we want to see that movement towards a coterminous geography with our LISP, and the SAP, which I've been the secretariat for, will disappear over time. In Somerset, which is the other half of our LEP, they're looking at solutions as well, and we're working with them around that. So it will be different horses for different courses, but I think over time, LSIPs under the statutory instrument will become the main tool, and the evidence piece that we've done through SAPs and the good work that we were doing will just evolve into that new framework.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And yeah, it's a really full answer. It's great to hear that from somebody like yourself in that position, just how these things might play out in the future. So thank you for that, Phill. So I'm going to just pull the screen share back up now and just finish off with a few slides. But as we're doing that, just thank you ever so much to Claire and Phill in particular for taking your time out to join us today. Some really insightful conversation and input we've had there, and I'm sure if people watching the webinar either now or on playback have got other questions, and please reach out to us and we can try to hook you up with those more specific questions. So hopefully now everybody can see the screen share again, if somebody just gives me a nod. Excellent, thank you very much. And what I just wanted to do is finish off with a few slides as usual, just explaining a little bit about some of the next webinars and things coming up. And as I promised at the outset, an exciting announcement today as well. So just to kind of wrap up, the role of data there, as we've heard from Claire, from Phill, is critical in all of this. Understanding what's going on in your local economy, whether that's what jobs are driving employer demand or what skills employers are looking for, is vital that you understand that for your regions. So as always, we're here to help. If you've got any questions on how we can support you with that, then please do reach out to us. To that end as well, and just explaining a little bit more about how we can help. Today we see that we've now got live in analyst, or for analyst customers, now within the tool you'll be able to see the global occupation taxonomy, a really exciting development in terms of how you can access and use and analyze some of that job posting data. Going to make that kind of market research element much easier and faster with these specialist occupation groupings, which help us to strike that balance between the detailed precision that we can sometimes find ourselves with something like a job title, and then the aggregation as well. It's going to be reviewed at least annually, so it's going to be far more up to date and current than government taxonomies such as SOCs, or standard occupational classifications. And just the visual on the screen there, and you'll be able to see this on the slides afterwards, just a quick example of how this works. So we've got these very broad career areas, so information technology there as an example highlighted in the middle. Then we can move across into occupation groups, more specific occupations, and then into the specialised occupation. So being able to select those groups at those different levels, as I said, a really great way to get the balance between that detailed precision and then helpful aggregation. And sitting alongside the open skills taxonomy is going to be a really powerful way to analyse job posting data. So a couple of webinars that are coming up, two definitely not to be missed. I think this one on Friday, again with Will and Ben, is going to be a really great conversation, learning from the data-driven approach of local skills improvement plan Trailblazer. A really good panel on that one again. Andrew Cropley from West Notts College and Chris Hobson from East Midlands Chamber of Commerce, Spencer Moore from SimSpot. I think that one's going to be a really good conversation. And again, what we're trying to do from these webinars is join the dots on some of this conversation. How are people working collaboratively together and using data to as that common language to thread some of these conversations together. And finally there, the next webinar, I think this one will be the last one in this current series. I'm sure we'll be doing more in the future. The levelling up agenda again, and this one focusing on reducing disparities. That one's on the 28th of June at 2 p.m. And as always, you can sign up for those webinars on our website. So hopefully everyone's enjoyed today's session. I think there's been some really good discussion. Hopefully it's been useful to get perspectives from different people. And as always, if any of us can help, then please get in touch and we'll be happy to do so. But look forward to seeing you all again soon.